Well, thank you, Judith, for doing my presentation. I have nothing to add. I want to say thank you to Radcliffe. It has been so far a wonderful experience, and it has been great to be with all the other fellows and understanding how we all helping in a way or another to make everything better. Today, I am going to experiment. This is a new presentation. Let's see how it goes. It might be a little long. Let's see. Get ready. So I want to start with a quote by Jacques Rancière, where he talks about aesthetic. Aesthetic doesn't designate the discipline dedicated to the study of art or the beautiful. It designates a regime of experience. For a long time, I've been interested in the idea of aesthetics. But maybe because my English is not very good, I realized one day that if you change the age of aesthetics, you have the word ethics. And then I start thinking maybe I should be doing aesthetics work instead of aesthetic work. Then, of course, because it's a language situation, and in Spanish it says estética, I realized they're very similar, so maybe if you take the A out of it, it's aesthetics, which means it is ethics. And this is exactly what I would like my work as an artist to be experimenting with and researching. Is there aesthetics in the ethics, and what does that mean? John Cage, many decades ago, predicted that ethics is the aesthetics of the future. But really, my work as an artist has always been questioning what is art for. I never take for granted the function of art and what it does for people. So I want to start with the reference. In 1917, Marcel Duchamp did a piece called The Fountain, where he presented a urinary in a pedestal in a gallery. Actually, it was a competition for art, and it was dismissed as an offensive object. But today, of course, this is the objects through which we can look at reality in an augmented way. So yes, after this piece, of course, in some way we decided that art is a way to look at reality, an augmented reality. But actually, I think it caused also a problem. I think when it first started it was great, but now I think has caused a problem, which is that from the 20th century to today, the least disputed artistic strategy is just to remove the use value of an object, and therefore that becomes automatically art. For me, this is extremely dangerous because it is, first of all, very automatic, and secondly, do not address a lot of other issues that art can do, and other things art can do. And of course, the one thing I really like about this is that art is a gesture. It's not only an object, but it is a gesture, and that's how I see art. Also in 1917, there were, of course, the Soviet Revolution, and with it, there was exactly a different parameter for understanding art, which is art that would be like a kind of agitpop or propaganda tool for the government, but at the same time, it created the possibility to have a very distinctive relationship with the function of art. One, while the urinary was bringing the life inside of the museum, for example, cinema train that they had was bringing art out into people's life. I think this is a kind of like a parallels that the binary situation that happens very often in the discussion in the art world, where people are like, no, art is to be looking at something, or art is a way by which you just are aware of something, you look at something. But there is another group of people, or another tendency, where people want to use art for something else. Of course, what happened in those very heated discussions is one group tell the other that that kind of work is not good because it's too market-oriented, and the other group say to the other group, yeah, but yours is just propaganda. So in a way, I am very related to this discussion, and this is part of my recent research. And also I'm very related with the ideas of utopia. For me, as a Cuban artist, coming out of a revolution, utopia is not something that will never be achieved, but it's actually something that you construct. And of course, here we have, I want to show you kind of the context in which my work has been influenced. Here it says to fight for something that is impossible and to conquer it. That's the kind of ideology that I was growing up with. Of course, later you realize it's all crap, but in the moment you're very, you're young and listening too much. And of course, one thing that was very interesting is that in that time in Cuba, we were extremely related in a very, they call it internacionalismo proletario, so we were very international with the different causes, and we even think at the time that religion is another tool for fight. Of course, the artists were supposed to be the warriors for this ideology, and art a tool. So politics in Cuba has been always used in its affect sphere. Like, it's very important the way we always understand in Cuba politics through emotions. But what I'm interested in my work is to see if we can transform affect into political effectiveness. So I want to show you different examples of my work, and in between I'm going to show you more than what the work is about, kind of the overall methodology of work that I've been trying to create. So I started in 1985 a series of work called Homage to Ana Mendieta, and what I did was very basic. I just reproduce all the work of Ana Mendieta when I learned that she died and we will never meet in person. So I decided to just do exactly the same performances for 10 years. Of course, this caused, this bring a lot of interest. I discovered to this piece a lot of things that actually after have been continual investigation in my work, which is, for example, the ideas of authorship. The fact that a lot of people were, but this is not your work, it's somebody else's work. So I was always claiming that my work was a gesture to trying to rescue another artist from the cultural memory of a country where actually people who left were erased from the history. So therefore, so what happened is, like, in the process, I learned that even when you try to do something personal and an homage, in the context of Cuba, which is highly political charged, the work will always have a political implication. So in a way, I was, okay, I cannot escape it, so let's get into it. Another example of things I'm interested at is this piece where it's called Destierro, displacement, and it is an Inquisi Conde icon, African icon, that is used usually to venerate by the people. And also you can use it to ask for something. And if you don't give the icon what you promise in return, they might go after you and do some harm. Here I did the performance during Fidel Castro's birthday by chance in Cuba. And of course the work was about this idea of all the promises that have been made, or the social promises that have not been accomplished. What I learned through doing this piece and what I was trying to do is, how can I do art that speaks to everybody? How can I do art not only because it's in the street and outside the museum, but has a language that can be understood by most people? Because the issues I'm talking about are issues that concern everybody. And in between these people I want to talk to, I also want to talk to people in power. I also want to talk to politicians. So something very weird happened when I was doing this performance. Because it's Fidel Castro's birthday, a lot of police came to see what's going on. Why are people spontaneously having like a demonstration kind of style, like following this person? And a kid say, no, this is an artwork. And the police, who was not trained probably for such a situation, think, okay, then it's fine. Continue, proceed. So I think that was a moment of big realization for me, because I say, oh, so if it's art, is this okay? And I decided that I want to work with that. Therefore, after that, I have used the context of art and the privileges, let's say, that art gives you to say things that in another way I could not say. Almost as is art is the language of the citizens in places where they cannot speak. But also something happened. I think I realized that if I want to talk to people who are in power position, like that police, maybe the symbolic strategy will not work anymore. And then I decided I wanted to change symbolism for direct experience. Another piece I did in '93 and '94 was a newspaper. Of course, in Cuba, even today, printed newspaper is forbidden, is illegal. But of course, I'm using art, right? So I did the newspaper. It didn't go that well, but I had my first interrogation by police. But one thing I was very interested at is the fact that I was trying to use the strategy of hyperrealism to do art. What I mean by that is, like, I wanted the work not to be like a newspaper, but look like a newspaper, circulate like a newspaper, being experienced as a newspaper. So I really wanted the distance between representation and presentation to be completely crushed, small. So the other thing I did is I realized that if I want to talk to power, and if I want to talk to people who make decision making, I will appropriate the resources of power to do my work. So from this moment on, the materials of my work would not be anymore like, oh, like an icon from, like some representation. It will be a newspaper, a school, political speech, and so on. So I'm going to appropriate the ways power talks to do my own work. And also, of course, I realized that my work in general is a test to propaganda. What I do is I don't say what you're saying is not true. My attitude, my performativity is, I believe you completely, and I'm going to behave as if the propaganda was real. And then, of course, you realize that everything is not real, and this is when the work happens. Another aspect of my work is the performance. I study performance, and this is a piece I did where I get with a friend. His name is J. Castro, no political work. It was just a coincidence. We got together and we decided to sign a contract where the first of the two who died will give the body to the other to do a performance. We don't want to do the piece soon. We're trying to. But one thing happened in this piece. The first thing is, like, I realized that as a performance artist, I didn't want to work anymore with the limits of the body. I didn't want to know if, like, I can be, which I did, hanging for whatever hours in the ceiling, or, or cutting myself and see how much blood I can, I was kind of not interested in that, because the reason was not because it's not a legitimate art practice, it's because I realized that in the political context, it is very easy to people in power to say, oh, that's her psychological damage, whatever artwork she needs to do. And I was like, no, it's not about me, it's about us. So I realized that I needed to get away from that and start working the limits of society. And then, of course, I say, okay, I don't do performance art anymore. I don't want to belong to that tradition. I want to belong to arte de conducta, which is the name I came up with. And it means art that is using social behavior as an artistic material. And of course, another thing that happened with this piece that was very interesting is that when we told people about it, people were like, but what is the art? Is the art the idea the artist had? Is the art the actual paper, like the document that you have? Or is the art not yet there and you're going to do it in a few years when you die? I never answered those questions. But I'm very interested in the fact that I want my projects to be a moment in which people don't take for granted the artistic condition of it. Why? Because I think that way people can relate even more to it. Another thing is that when you start being a political artist, there are a lot of things that happen. And one of them is you realize you want to look for sustainable change. You don't want to just complain and use art to say things you can read on the newspaper or on the internet. You want to use all the tools that art has to change something. But you understand that very quickly that the changes you can do as an artist is very small. It can be mostly like, you know, a small example to maybe excite somebody else to do something else. So I understood that I needed to look for ways by which that change could be sustainable. In this case, I was invited to be part of a group of experts to the repertoire on the field of cultural rights for the first artistic freedom of expression and cultural rights document that was actually signed and voted by the UN members. That's another story, what happened with those things in the UN, but at the moment I was very excited. Okay, so in my work I have several guidelines. One is that I work with the political imaginary. What I mean by that is that I like to work with what people imagine places are. For example, this is a piece I did in Cuba in the year 2000. The year 2000 was very important because we were always promised that by year 2000 we'll be all like perfect. You know, everything will be perfect and we'll be in communism and so on. And then the year 2000 arrived and we were like, uh-huh. And then I did this piece, which was completely dark. This is only for you to see the elements. Completely dark with this sugar cane. And then you enter and you see a little video of Fidel opening his military vest to show that he has no bulletproof. But for the piece, what the piece was saying is that the real vulnerable people is not the person on TV. It's the people who are there taking care of the person on TV. So you had these naked Cuban people who were passing, the audience who was passing through it. Another thing I'm interested in terms of the strategy of my work is I don't work with actors, or I don't train people to look like something. I always work with people, professional experience. An example is this piece I did with Bernardine Dorn and Bill Ayers. The members of Weatherman Underground, who actually now are professors, legit professors of university. And in this piece, I asked them, it was at the very month, I think, where Obama was elected, and I say, what do we do when the person you know, are in the same ideas is elected, no? So you are not opposition anymore. And they start talking, right? And they're very good speakers. And then, of course, I had planted, like politicians do, I had planted people in the audience to interrupt them all the time. So what happened is, like, they couldn't speak. Like, there was no way they could speak. I have to say, after I did this piece, I'm always afraid that somebody do that to me too, but it's fine. So I wanted to create this situation where you lose the power that is giving, you know, in this position that you are. Another example is the horses. This is called Tattling Whisper, number 5. And what I did is talk to the mounted police and say, can you use the crowd control technique in the audience of the exhibition? What was very interesting in this piece was that for one side of it is like I wanted to take things that aren't on TV that you don't experience yourself and bring it to real life. So maybe next time you see it, you know how to react. You have kind of tested yourself in certain situations. The sadness of this is how quickly people follow orders. And I have to say that nobody knew this was an art piece. The artwork was not announced. My name was not anywhere in the museum. So that just happened that they just arrived, and it was kind of a surprise. Another thing I work with is political memory, which you also will be surprised how quickly it faints. So this is a piece I did in Russia. Of course, you could see through a peephole, or you could enter. You always, in my work, has the option to participate or just miss it, let's say. So what I did for this is there were these photographers in the Revolution Square, Red Square, and taking photos of these very cute animals dressed like people. Not to miss the irony of my kids. And what I say, come to the exhibition, and we were going to take family pictures with these animals. So in a way, kind of the way politicians do is very spectacular, so you see only what they want you to see. They give you the photo right there, and then this is a family portrait. What they discover after the photo is given, this is the photo of the person who created the KGB. So their family portrait is taken with the KGB. It was interesting that a lot of people did not know who that person was. They thought it was just a random, heroic kind of photo. Only 2 people decided not to have the photo taken when they saw the image. I also, because I'm a Cuban artist and I have to, I did a lot of my work inside Cuba, but then I started to be invited outside. I had to rethink what does it mean to do the work in other contexts. So I was invited to redo this piece in Germany, but differently. The curator said, do the same piece, but differently. I said, well, how can I do a piece about the perception of a place? So I decided to go and work with the history. Of course, when you say Germany back then, now maybe it's refugees, but back then it was about the Nazi history. So I went back and I decided to put a lot of lights, so actually you don't see anything. And there was people, the sound of people marching and cocking a gun. What is interesting is if you are in the right position, you realize that these are not sounds, but these are actual people with actual guns in the space. And of course, it is a metaphor of how power always can observe you better than you can observe them. Then, of course, another thing I do, or I hope to do, is see if I can integrate art to people's everyday political life. This is one of the reasons I go so often outside of art institutions. This is a project I did in Mexico during the election, the last election. And one thing was interesting in the research that while every election in Mexico talk about immigration issues, they do not talk in terms of the people they receive, but they talk about the Mexicans who left, who are here in the United States. And what we did with this project is to find the elements of demand of these immigrants who arrived to Mexico and are treated even worse than the Mexicans are treated here, ironically. And we wanted that to appear for the first time in the public debate of the candidates. So that means I was talking nonstop forever in every newspaper and everything because we were trying to put the message across. And of course, we did a lot of research, but for the first time in the last debate, not exactly how we said, but very similar, the candidate that was going to lose, because everybody knew he was in the last, said and talked for the first time in a Mexican election about the situation of immigrants in Mexico. Some of the ways by which we make this completely public was also to rescue a tradition in Mexico and Latin America in general, which is los voceros, the voice people, meaning the people who shout the news, so you buy the newspaper. So we had 100 of them walking the most important streets of Mexico next to the Palace of Congress and the presidential palace to shout the rights for immigrants. But I think I wanted the documentation of this piece not to be a talk or a photo, but I wanted to embed this project in the actual system, electoral system in Mexico. So what we did is every 6 years, there is a little moment where people can actually propose a new party, and we are number 45 in the list. Unfortunately, art institutions not always have the capacity to continue this project, so I had to stop. But at least we arrived so far as that. So, as you can see, a lot of my work is a collective production, it's a collective construction. So, in a way, I cannot say I'm an artist and claim sole authorship of everything. So I have come up with this idea of initiator. So basically, what I do with my work is I create conditions for people to behave socially in different ways. So I have to give kind of half of the credit to the audience. In this case, I put a podium like this one inside the art institution and told people they could say whatever they wanted for 1 minute. Of course, without offending anybody or calling to violence. But, and it was a kind of a reconstruction of the first speech Fidel gave, where there was a big myth because all these dove were in him, and for 50 years people are like, do you think that's a sign of God, or do you think that was trained? So I decided to solve this solution by training doves and having that guy put it on people. But for me it was very interesting because it was the first time a lot of the people could see themselves in the leadership position in Cuba. But of course, I always say I'm a political artist, so if I'm an initiator, I cannot call myself anything else but political initiator. Also, the work I do is very different, like not always, I mean, the impact and that you can have on people in a 45-minute performance in a museum doesn't work sometimes when you want to do other changes. So I have come up with two ways of working. One is short-term projects, the one that work for the art exhibition demands, let's say, and the long-term projects. This project can take from a few months to 10 years. And these are projects that want to believe and want to test if art can change something socially. And therefore, you have to work in the temporality of society, not the temporality of the quick people in the art exhibition having drinks. So how do I do this? I do autocrítica institucional. This for the socialists that might mean something because we had the self-criticism in the meetings in Cuba. So I want the institution to do the same. So institutional self-critique. What it means is that instead of me criticizing what exists, what the government has done or institutions have done, what I do is I create my own institution. My own institution with the ways I hope I would like for it to function in reality. So this is kind of, again, a way to also say that things are possible, because at least in Cuba, a lot of justification is that you cannot do it. Okay, I'm a single artist with no budget, and I did it. How can you as a government cannot do it? So it's a very clear way to show them that. It's a lot of trouble, but it's worth it. So in this case, I created an art school, an alternative art school to study political and social performances, and to redirect the conversation about what is art for and for whom. So we wanted to create work for the people in a moment where the Cuban government was using the art market to derail the conversation into social responsibility for artists and just acquire some money and some houses and be quiet. So I wanted to rescue this conversation that at the moment looked very démodé, but we perceive and we did it. So this is some of the works also of the students. This is a machine for the Fidel you want. And I did other pieces, like, for example, Immigrant Movement International, where I wanted to talk about the political condition of immigrants, which is the first condition that is lost when you cross a border. And I created, this is the other thing, all of these projects look almost exactly as the real projects. I don't want to make something weird. I want to make something that people feel comfortable and make an easy entrance to this process. Instead of being, oh, this is art, I don't understand it. No, no, this is just a storefront for you. And then once you enter, let's have a conversation. You know, so in this case, we did something that looks very much like a, grassroots organization. And we also did this, I'm very proud of this, we did the Migrant Manifesto. And why I'm proud of this is because for the first time, I guess, I don't know, but we put together people like Saskia Sassen, like a rapporteur from the UN on immigration, with the mom next door who has a 6th grade education, together with this guy who is one of the experts in the United States about the economy of immigrants. You know, like all of these people together, and together we generated this Migrant Manifesto. Of course, a pin. We also created a pin. So we actually, during this piece, we realized that every time you talk about law with immigration, people get freaked out. So I said, okay, let's leave that aside and let's just respect immigrants first, you know. So we did this campaign that you want one, I can give you one. And we actually did international gatherings. We also did postcards for immigrants to send their friends. We did also billboards for Europe when we were invited to festivals. And a flag. We made a flag. Here is with the text, but the flag is just the drawing. And of course, Immigrant Movement International is not only the work that has been done in Queens, but it's also every time we are addressing immigrant issues, because it's happening the same everywhere and forever. Like after 15 years working on this, we have the same problems, the same unanswered questions, and the same racism and discrimination towards immigrants. So I did this campaign, a political campaign, called Dignity Has No Nationality. It was a postcard, you know, so you signed the postcard. And actually, it is a project when I asked Pope Francis to please give Vatican City citizenship to all immigrants in the world who has no papers. I'm still, if somebody has the contact, let me know, because I'm trying to bring him all the postcards, around 20,000. Another thing I do is what I said before, behavior art or conduct art. And the reason for that is because in Spanish, conducta means the behavior, but also means something that travels from one place to another, the conductor of one. So I want art to be that as well. And this is an example of a piece I did of behavior art where I wanted to work with the reaction of people. In Colombia, of course, you say Colombia and you first think drug. Now you think peace. I'm glad my work is getting dated with better reasons. But in this case, I came to the Colombia, and we did a very boring panel with all the actors of the Colombian situation, like a family of missing person, los desplazados leadership, and so a FARC person and a paramilitary person, and people were like, this is so boring. We know this, what is this artist coming to do this to, you know? And then 5 minutes or so into it, a person with a tray of real cocaine was passing through the audience of the event. Of course, that is behavior art, because what happened after that was the piece. So a big discussion, and yeah. So another aspect of my work is what I call political timing and specificity. It means that I'm not always conscious of the place and the people, but also what is the political state of the place? What are the actors? What are the laws? What are the discussion, the political emotions and that we have at that moment? And in this case, I did one piece that is called Yo también exijo, I also demand. And for this piece, this is not egocentric, but I self-cited myself, quoted myself with another piece. So I took the piece of the microphones, And I said, I'm going to do it again. But instead of the safety of an art institution, I'm going to do it in the Revolution Square, which is the place where power has the power. And of course, it didn't go any well at all. Many things happened. I was detained, interrogated, and so on and so on. But I think the work was a success because it showed the way in which power operates. It showed to everybody, and I talked to people in the left and also people in social justice groups, and this is a very hard conversation when you talk about Cuba because these people do not want to see the new Cuba. They're still thinking about the Cuba from the 70s, who was good to Angela Davis, who was good to Angola. This is not anymore the Cuba you have today, And it's very hard for me to have this conversation. So I'm very happy that through this work I could have some of that conversation. Right now, I think the excitement of which I am in favor of the relation Cuba-US, and Obama was amazing when he was there. He became, I always say that he was not a president, he talked to Cubans as a community organizer. And that was the most beautiful thing to see there. What happened with this piece is, in the midst of all of this tension that lasted 8 months, I was extremely satisfied that, in a way, government performed for me. So after being so many years trying to talk to power, to have a dialogue with them, they finally talk back. Unfortunately, the way they talk back is like during my reading of Hannah Arendt, The Origins of Totalitarianism, with the speakers to the street so every Cuban could hear it in Spanish, of course, they send a brigade of jackhammer for the street in front of my house. They were already fixing all Havana, but my house was far from where it's supposed to happen. And I even talked to guys, say, this is not good, this is not, it's going to be, no, there are orders. I say, okay, orders has to be done. So, of course, I think for me, what you see today is a fracture of Cubans' hope for change. Not for institutional economic change or Americans going and traveling there, but for their own personal achievement of change. But what I want to do is I want to use art again to try to see if we can start a new dialogue. I don't want to talk about what happens in Cuba 5-10 years from now when all the decisions are made, where all the contracts are made with the big corporations and nobody can change anything for real. Now there is a moment of a lot of instability, so maybe one voice of a person can change a deal that's going to be made that would not help the Cubans. So what I want to do is I want to start an institute. We are already working on the Institute of Artivism, Hannah Arendt. And what we based this is on the fact that, yes, in Cuba in the 60s, we had a literacy campaign that I'm very proud of, where almost everybody in Cuba learned how to write and read. The problem is you cannot read what you want and you cannot say what you think. So what I want with the team, we are a group of people working in how can we bring a civic rights literacy campaign to Cuba. So people learn not only the rights, but how can they defend it and they identify when they are not being respected. Of course, very quickly say, the three of the elements is we're going to use wish tank. We want to see what people want. We want to do think tanks where we bring people from hopefully all over the place, experts, to meet with them, the same way we did with the Immigrant Manifesto, to bring ideas of what in the world have been done in these same situations, and hopefully do tank will be the way in which we're going to show this in the street or to other people. It's very tough, but we're going to do it. Of course, as you can see by now, I'm trying to talk in my work about what are the uses of art. Can art be a tool? Can art be a tool for social change? Can art be a tool for empowerment? And of course, we also need to think not only what are the uses of art, but what are the uses of art institutions today, and rethink that. My answer to that is going back to the urinary. And my proposal is that it's time to put the Shams urinal back into the restroom and use it. Thank you very much.